This is the never-before-seen photo of 13-year-old Samantha Geimer. Polanski was 43 years old then. Polanski brought the young girl to his friend Jack Nicholson's house in the Hollywood Hills. Nicholson wasn't there at the time, and the day took an ugly turn. Polanski plied the 13-year-old with champagne and a Quaalude. He then brought her into a bedroom where he sexually assaulted her. When Samantha's mother heard what happened, she went to the police. Polanski pled guilty to one felony count of unlawful sexual intercourse. But when Polanski heard that the judge was thinking of handing out more punishment, he fled to Europe, where he stayed, despite multiple efforts to extradite him back to the U.S. Polanski told Diane Sawyer back in 1994 that it took many years for him to understand the harm he'd inflicted.
I think at that time, I had a hard time to persuade myself that it was wrong, because I don't think anybody was hurt.
In my recent film on Strauss-Kahn, I showed how influential Zionists have an elite status in the modern globalist world empire, similar to the way Roman citizens in their ancient world empire had a different set of laws and privileges from their subjects. Some Zionists retorted that Strauss-Kahn, who's escaped 2 rape investigations and a number of other sex allegations, is only one man, and thus not representational. So today I'll offer some more glaring examples so the pattern becomes obvious to everyone. I pointed out that even with the 2 set-aside sex charges, just think about the laughable scenario of a super-capitalist, mega-rich banker leading the Socialist Party of France. That would make about as much sense as Obama selecting me as his running mate for his vice president in the Democratic Party. And Strauss-Kahn said in a magazine interview years ago that the first thing he thinks about every morning is how he can help Israel. Now that sounds great for a candidate for Israel, but certainly not for a man who wants to be president of France. I mean, doesn't every nation want its leader to be loyal to its own nation and not a foreign nation? How does he get away with all this? As I said, there's only one way that this is possible. And that is the fact that some very powerful men in media and politics have exactly the same loyalty to Zionist Israel as does Strauss-Kahn. How about some more examples? Take film director Roman Polanski, another Zionist. He gives an underage virgin girl drugs. He then rapes the girl. The case overwhelmingly proves his guilt, and then he flees and becomes a criminal fugitive in Europe. Years later, he's arrested in Switzerland, but his influential brethren in both Hollywood and in government and in media launch an international campaign on behalf of their poor, persecuted brother. Poor Roman Polanski, they cry. But how about the poor girl who was violated years ago and who can find no closure and no justice? Look at one of the biggest crooks of the 20th century, Mark Rich. Now, Rich is criminally charged with stealing millions of dollars. He flees to Europe, but he and his tribe are very politically connected. Even while he's a wanted man, his brothers have the political muscle and chutzpah to get Bill Clinton to pardon him. Now, that's unprecedented. Pardoned while you're still on the run before you can even stand trial. Now he's completely free. Wow, now that's a chosen person. Take Vladimir Kaczynski, one of the biggest organized criminals in Russia. He steals hundreds of millions of dollars, is engaged in all kinds of organized criminal activity. He flees Russia, and Interpol international warrant is issued for his arrest. Guzinski, though, is one of the elite. He's head of the Jewish Congress of Russia. End of story. He's got powerful Zionist allies in government media positions in every European nation and in America. In Greece, he's arrested on these crime warrants, but he's released in record time, 5 days. And credit for this is taken by the Jewish Congress. And then he easily finds asylum in a European nation that won't honor extradition. Now, the same thing is true for another huge criminal, Boris Berezovsky. Berezovsky was called the Wolf of the Kremlin. But his brethren in high places get him asylum in Britain and Spain. There's even evidence that Berezovsky funded Chechenian terrorism in Russia that killed hundreds of men, women, and children. No problem. He's one more Zionist above the law, with friends in very high places. You have another member of the tribe by the name of Khodorkovsky in Russia, a criminal extortionist and mastermind who stole hundreds of millions of dollars of Russian resources through fraud and criminality. But you read the Zionist-controlled Time and Newsweek and New York Times and Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, and you would think he's a hero. And at the same time, the man who supported his prosecution for his crimes, Putin, is the one labeled in the press as the criminal. You can see the distinctions not just in individuals, but in the media-manufactured ethnic images as well. Hollywood and the rest of the mass media has so associated Italians with the mafia and organized crime, you can't even hear Italian music or see a spaghetti dinner on the big screen without thinking Sopranos or Goodfellas or Godfather. But in fact, the most murderous criminal organization in American history was Murder Incorporated. It was not an Italian organization, but an overwhelmingly Jewish one. Watch my film documentary, Israel, Promised Land for Organized Crime, and you'll learn about the world champions of organized crime for the last 2,000 years. They're not Italian. You hear a lot about Al Capone in the United States. Not 1 in 10 people that know about Al Capone know the real, most powerful organized crime boss of America in the 20th century, who was Meyer Lansky. And they don't know that Meyer Lansky was a big Zionist supporter. So, my friends, it's not just Strauss-Kahn. It's not just Roman Polanski. It's Mark Rich, Guzinski, Berezovsky, Khodorkovsky, and thousands more Zionist criminals who are above the law. But thankfully, Zionist power is founded on something quite distinct from Roman power. It's actually based on an illusion through their domination of the mass media. It's illusion because the vast majority of America and Europe and the rest of the world would not tolerate these criminals if they knew the whole truth. But every day that truth's coming out. The illusions are crumbling down with the increasing power of the internet, a power that's democratizing information. For instance, a few years ago, the Zionist media could say anything they wanted to about me. But now people have the chance to hear what I actually believe and what I actually say, rather than the caricature of the controlled press. Thank God that people still recognize the truth when they finally hear it. And that's because the truth is powerful. Far more powerful than the media bosses. And when this media control is broken, the criminals who run the international robber banks like Goldman Sachs and the criminal banking organizations such as the Federal Reserve, the World Bank, and Strauss-Kahn's International Monetary Fund will be prosecuted for the greatest thievery in the history of mankind. When this media power is broken, as it's being broken by these simple, humble words of truth that I speak to you right now, the people will pour into the streets in numbers that will make the current demonstrations on Wall Street and around America look like toothpicks in the Atlantic. I am working every day of my life to see these criminals brought to justice, and for the American people, as well as every people on earth, to be free of their criminal power. I ask you to show the courage necessary to make this movement sweep the United States, Europe, and the world. It's happening. Have the courage to stand up for what you really believe. Have the courage to support those men and women who speak for you. Here is a postscript. Very soon after I recorded this video, but before it was edited, I was kidnapped and jailed in Europe on a bogus immigration charge in order to silence me and prevent a lecture to an audience in Cologne. What was my crime, you might ask? Well, I committed no crime. I was kidnapped by the Zionist-controlled politicians who were desperate to prevent the European people from hearing the truth that I speak. And yes, it was a kidnapping. For kidnapping is when you take someone against their will and you imprison them away from the world. Ironic, isn't it? Unlike the Zionist rogues I exposed in this video, I had committed no crime. But the human rights criminals kidnapped and imprisoned me. They committed a serious crime for which men are prosecuted in the Hague International Court. Now, these are the same criminals who let Zionist rogues go free in the Western world, and the same criminals in the Zionist-influenced media that make into heroes the Zionist criminals. Israeli ministers come and go to Europe who are part of the Zionist regime that has enthusiastically ethnically cleansed hundreds of thousands of people, who have tortured tens of thousands of human beings, who have bombed and burned mothers and children in their own beds. But the Zionist stooges in media and government must kidnap and imprison a non-violent, peaceful man who wants to stop these Zionist atrocities and who wants to cease these insane, Israel-driven wars. If you wanted proof of the new global elite, an elite that gets away with murder and then silence those who oppose them, well, now you have it. But what are you going to do about it? You who are listening to my words at this very moment will know exactly what kind of man or woman you are. You'll know by how you act on the truth you have learned. I wonder, is there any honor in you, any decency in you? You will not have to answer that to me, but you must answer it to yourself and to your own soul. I sincerely hope that you are the person that you think you are.